All right, good morning everyone. We're excited to get started today with our webinar, Economic Statecraft in Contemporary Warfare, Understanding the Challenges, brought to you by the Potomac Institute for Policy Studies. My name is Madeline Field and I'm an assistant editor at War on the Rocks. I'll be your moderator today. I work on our Cogs of War vertical, which focuses on defense tech and industrial policy. So this is actually the first of our 9-part webinar series assessing the economic statecraft problem set as a core national security domain by defining its strategic foundations, assessing how the U.S. government, military, allies, industry, and society organize and execute economic power, and culminating in recommendations for doctrine, workforce development, and institutionalization. These webinars will be based on our 11-part article series that will be published by War on the Rocks titled War by Other Ledgers, with that first article in that series launching about 2 weeks ago today. So today we'll be talking about how we got to this moment and a couple of major questions, like how economics currently fits into national security, why it's important in an environment of strategic competition with China, who the key players are, and lastly, why warfighters and policymakers should care. So I'll be joined today by two excellent experts from the Potomac Institute, Dr. Tim Welter, a senior research fellow, and Dr. Peggy McWeeney, a research fellow. Thank you guys for being here and for forging this partnership.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for having us.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, so to our audience, Tim and Peggy will be doing a live Q&A at the end of this session, so do make sure to drop your questions in the chat. This will also be uploaded on YouTube after we're done, so you can rewatch it or share it with friends. But we have a lot to cover today, so I want to jump into our first question. Tim, why are you guys launching a partnership with us right now? What work have you guys been doing behind the scenes in the past couple of years?
No, thanks for the question, and thank you for doing this with us, and thanks Peggy for being here. So this has been a long time in coming, I think for a lot of reasons, and now is especially an important time, I think, for several reasons, but I think it's serendipitous that we ended up forging this relationship, this partnership, for a lot of reasons. But if you look back at October, we had this economic statecraft summit that we partnered on with Texas A&M, and it was that was the fifth one, but this was the second year in a row that we partnered with them. And to that end, we brought together people from the academic community, from the policy community, from industry, that have been working on economic statecraft related issues, and brought them all together. And this year was a little bit different in that there's this realization, in a very real way, that we're in an economic war, and I think that those words together, there was a nervousness, I guess, to actually use those words together. But to that end, industry and the private sector were really grappling with this and understanding that there's risks associated with this. What does it mean to them? And that was just one of the major things that came out of that economic summit and the discussions there. But really, this is about why now. This is about education, right? It's about educating, helping policymakers understand the various facets. And if you look at the series that we're going to do and the different articles that we're going to do, we tackled several different facets of this complex problem. It's a societal level problem, right? Everyone is touched by the economy in some way, in various fashions, right? So this is about educating those players, but also educating the general public about what's going on. It's acknowledging the problem. It's like the challenge, I guess, if you'll say. It's doing that, and then it's together driving action. So what are the tangible things that we could do together? The community, the ecosystem that's involved with this, that's been focused on this. What can they all do to move the ball forward? So. And just a quick plug on Potomac Institute. Those of you that don't know, we're a 501c3. We've been around for 30 years, really focused on that intersection of science and technology, industry and government, and making sure that all works together well.
Yeah. And likewise, we're really interested, or we're very excited about forging this partnership, also because of education. This isn't a domain that we've typically focused on our writers or our readers, so we're excited to learn along with you guys and hopefully, spark some debate. So I do want to just take it back a couple decades. what has economic statecraft looked like throughout U.S. history, throughout national history? Just what's the history that's led us up to this moment?
Do you want to take a stab at that at all, or do you want me to jump in on that first?
Sure, I could take it over when we get to some of the competition with China. But if you have a deeper theory of economic statecraft.
So since the beginning days of the Republic, we have in some way carried out forms of economic statecraft, and it's ebbed and flowed, right? What's different about this time around is it hasn't been a major focus, right, as a huge lever of national security and to pursue strategic level objectives, except for in the last several years here, right? You look back at post-World War II, the Marshall Plan, right? That's a huge economic statecraft undertaking, right? To shape global norms, right? To help the world recover from the economic devastation that came along with World War II. And you look at what's going on in history with Iran and us and the rest of the world, putting sanctions on them in various forms and levels to deal with their pursuit of nuclear weapons, right? And then you look at what happened again with in recent history with Russia and Ukraine, right? The whole, a lot of the globe came together and really put the screws to Russia on using economic tools at a level that just I don't think has been seen in contemporary history, right? So. And then you go back again to the earliest days of the Republic, and you could see instances like that where we've leveraged the economic tool in various forms. So.
And Peggy, maybe you can answer this. When did our old way of doing economic statecraft become insufficient for this moment? How does that relate to China?
Yeah, absolutely. So I tend not to think a lot of this is new. As Tim said, Marshall Plan, things like that were foundational uses of economic statecraft. And we've had concerns over Chinese activity for decades too, starting in the 1990s with the Wenhu Li case and espionage. And there's been debates as long as I can remember, and I remember even in my undergraduate, which is quite a while now, talking about China owning our debt and what we should do with this type of leverage. The way I approach it at the Institute is about trade-offs. So our resident economist, Rosalie, will often say, are we wearing our economics glasses, or are we wearing our national security glasses today? Or for this project, or for whatever scenario. So while I don't think the threats or the difference has been quite new, or we failed to see anything coming, we've been looking with our economics glasses. And now, starting, I would say, the late 2010s, former President Obama, the Obama administration used to talk about currency manipulation, things like that. Again, these aren't really new issues, but I think the Trump administration brought home, this is not going to happen. The U.S. is getting a raw deal, whatever that means. He kept hammering that into the minds of Americans and policymakers, and he wasn't totally off base with that. And so there's been a shift. Again, not necessarily, the threat has grown in scale and intensity and in relevance across all sectors. I think tons of Americans, we feel it daily. We feel it, even the items coming from our Amazon and things like that. But the difference is that now we have to start approaching this issue from more of a national security lens than maybe we wanted to do previously. The two goals we talk about at the Institute, why we do anything, our reason for being, are U.S. economic prosperity and national security. And we want both. And ideally, they would overlap and converge. But in this instance, it looks like we do need some, I don't want to say protection because that has a lot of connotations, but just some, we need to work on this issue a little bit, a little more collaboration to deal with the scale and intensity of this threat that we've never seen in this manner. And I even take it off of China sometimes. Say, this is the threat that's coming at us from China right now. But this threat, this kind of threat, is going to continue. It's here to stay.
So, just to kind of tack on to that too, something we've seen in the venues that we've had on this issue, the studies that we've done, the people that we've worked with at the summits or wherever it might be, that you have members of the private sector, of industry, noticing things that are going on, right? That look different than they have historically, right? They're getting pressures from certain places where they didn't before, from an economic standpoint, or from board membership, or things like that, that they haven't seen, and they might not know how to really address it, right? Or they feel like there's a need to do something about it. They're not sure who in the federal government is who they should reach out to. So that trend there's been an uptick in that trend too. Sitting where we're sitting again here at the intersection of industry, government, and science and technology policy. Again, to your question, why is this a good time to do it? Do what we're doing. That actually weighs into a lot of it too. Is on the education piece.
So you guys brought up a ton of very interesting threads that I want to explore later. But first I want to get to your article, which I thought was great. It was published last week. You can access it on the War on the Rocks website. But you write that for the Chinese Communist Party, economic dominance is not a byproduct of growth. It is a deliberate strategy pursued vigorously across a wide spectrum, from coercion and obfuscation to seemingly innocuous compliance with global norms, always with the survival of the party's rule at the forefront. So that's a pretty loaded sentence. I do want to understand it better. Focus on manufacturing and trade policy has made China very rich. What makes you think that this goes beyond typical fiscal or monetary policy that the U.S. and, friendly nations would pursue? What makes this, more aggressive?
Well, look, there's a lot in that sentence. I'll unpack some of it and
Sure.
and definitely want some help here from Peggy to do that. But the Chinese Communist Party has an incredible challenge, hands down, and that's to oversee this huge country, 1.4 billion people, right?
Yeah.
Lots of different subcultures, lots of different regions, geography. So to keep all of those 1.4 billion people happy, right, means there needs to be some economic growth. They have to look like they're doing well, right? They got to feel that. They have their population is aging too, so not as many people in the workforce. So how do you continue to do that, right? The explosive growth that we've seen slow down in recent years. How do you deal with that? So but all that said, I'm not a trained China expert, but all the ones that I've dealt with in the last several years on this subject matter, the primary motivation of the Chinese Communist Party is to make sure that they stay in charge, right, and continue to be the ruling regime. And you look at what they've done between the 90s, right, the 1990s, when they started embedding folks into academia, into the research ecosystem, to start learning about the innovations that were happening here, and it's an open system, right? It's an open community, and that's part of who we are. That's part of our society is. But exploiting that purposefully is a different thing, right? And stealing and reverse engineering and such, and we'll get into that a little bit more, but. You look at the deliberate planning that the party has put out there. They've got these 5-year plans, right, that started in 2006 that said, hey, we're going to do X, Y, and Z, and that's really this is how we're going to stay in charge, right? We're going to do these things for you. We have this compact with you, the people, and how we go about. How they go about realizing those goals might look different than the way we would do something like that, right? From a values and a culture perspective. So you've got the 5-year plan, you've got the Belt and Road Initiative, right? So you have these series, and then the Made in China 2025, basically saying, hey, we're gonna be the lead in several sectors. We're gonna reduce reliance on other countries, and be the global leader, from a technological and scientific standpoint on several fronts. So, but how the process by which they've gone about doing that again looks different than how we would go about doing that. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And I come at this from a slightly different angle. I was a conflict researcher, still am a conflict researcher, but that's what my degree was in. And so, while I totally agree with Tim, there are just, I don't want to ascribe any motivations. I do not consider myself a domestic Chinese expert at all, but there are patterns that are hard to miss. Decades of patterns of intellectual property theft, embeddedness into academia, where the U.S. has been on the losing end of that, espionage. One of the things I study is, China has a great way of supplying critical components or critical chemicals, and somehow they just get into the wrong hands or the right hands, by whomever's perspective. I'm talking about fentanyl precursors to the cartels, or parts for autonomous vehicles, drones in Iran that get into the hands of non-state actors with anti-U.S. sentiment. It's hard to ignore all these pieces coming together over decades. And while I've been cautioned myself, the things like the Made in 2025 plan, can look aggressive to us. Western liberalism looks aggressive to China too. So that's why I try not to ascribe my Western bias to that. But decades of patterns where it's not just operating within the global system for their own prosperity, but a cultivated effort with financial systems, with the Asian Development Bank, just things like that, of trying to not just carve out their own piece of the pie, but degrade the U.S. in some way in order to get their piece of the pie as well. And it's difficult to ignore that evidence. And the more we talk to people, the more they agree, by and large. It's hard to pinpoint China is excellent at plausible deniability as well. And that's also part of the reason why other countries like working with China. Sometimes China will provide critical components or chemicals and not ask too many questions about where this is going. But yeah, again, it's something that people feel, and we have evidence of it almost daily. The sanctions evasions tactics, the non-state actor threat, the state actor threat, the aggression in the South China Sea, all of these things are hard to say there's no intent behind it.
Yeah, and that translates to, the top line from our article really is, hundreds of billions of dollars essentially, every year. And, it's documented, that, is lost essentially to some of these activities, right? And so what do you do about it, right? Yeah. How do you address it?
So I'm curious, as late as 2009, I think, Obama had a summit with one of the Chinese leaders, and he was saying, shared U.S. and China prosperity is good for all of us. It's good for the world. It seemed like a pretty hopeful outlook towards China's economic liberalization. So I'm curious why, how experts or analysts could have misread Chinese posturing or intent. What internal debates within the last couple of administrations might have looked like, whether that was like a more liberal or antagonistic policy towards China. Just where was the disconnect? Where did that start to grow?
My understanding is that Xi Jinping led a lot of retrenchment into classical growth of China politics. There was an idea around the Obama administration that China would continue, its markets would continue to liberalize, and it, as a byproduct, it would start to open up democratically a little bit. That did not pan out. In fact, we've seen quite the opposite. The CCP is getting more and more secretive. They're not allowing any documents into public view anymore, and that's why it's kind of difficult for a Westerner to be a China expert at this moment. There's very limited information coming out of the state intentionally. I think RAND is one that I could think of that has one library of CCP documents going back decades. But that's like a chip on their shoulder. They're very proud of that because that is incredibly difficult to find information even in Chinese. So I think there's been a modern retrenchment, which we didn't expect.
So we as a people tend to be very optimistic, very forward-looking, right? I mean, we always look at our history, right? Resilient, we like innovation, we want to be hopeful, we believe in other people despite all the vitriol and craziness that's happening. So culturally, we're attuned to want to believe that there's, I think, that there's an opportunity with economic opportunity comes a more liberal approach to governing, and obviously that hasn't panned out. And I don't think it was completely missed. You look at like the U.S.-China Economic and Security Review Commission. You look at like where, which they have a report. I think it's every year, and they just had one that just came out. But you look at kind of the work that they've done over the years, and you'll see evidence of where things were going, but recognition, I think, and reconciliation with what was actually happening, I think, really took it really came to light with the pandemic and kind of what happened there. So
you guys make several claims about Chinese involvement in research and trade sectors in the U.S., which you say led to the collapse of some American manufacturing sectors. I'm curious, how much do you think was intentionally directed by China, and how much was simply deindustrialization or poor or ineffective industrial policy by the U.S.?
Sure, I could start that one. Yeah, I put on my global optimism lenses as well, and I don't know how much was intentional, and maybe it doesn't matter totally at this point. There were gains to be made, efficiencies on both sides, and that's where our focus was for quite a while. Again, you would hope that these your economics classes and your national security classes overlap, but it seems that we've entered an era where we need to make a distinction. One of the difficulties with promoting national security over economics is if you spend $1 on economic policy, or this is a poor metaphor, but you can see sort of a return on investment. Spending on national security, you're not sure how much you're gaining, you're getting back, what war did not happen. Yeah. And so we've been reticent to take those lines. We've taken hard stances against China, and especially recently, but we haven't been willing to, and also we're intrinsically tied to them economically, so we haven't been willing to cut off their nose to spite our face. We're a consumer culture, we like consuming, and also the things that we've lost, the sectors that we've lost, there have been some critical ones that we have missed, semiconductors, batteries, critical minerals being the biggest ones. But if we're talking about, no one's talking about bringing every industry back to U.S. soil. It's unfeasible. There are such things as comparative advantages. We're high tech. We excel in our intellectual capacity. To totally cut ourselves off was never a good approach either. So actually, one thing we're working on now is how to invest in science and technology with our allies and partners. And what we've come down to is that it's going to always be risky. You cannot tell tomorrow who's going to be an ally and partner, but there are efficiencies to be made when partnerships and radar and satellites and things like that globally. And you can't predict the future, but we can't totally isolate ourselves either. So to get to the heart of the question was, I tend not to think it's been a 30-year plot of China to degrade our industrial policy. They definitely profited from us offshore in the way that we have. And there are just risks involved. Yeah.
So, we brought Sun Tzu into the whole discussion, right?
Yeah.
So know your rival, know your enemy, right? And I think, China studied like, hey, what makes the U.S. successful, right, from an economic standpoint, and how can we, and what are the weaknesses there that we can exploit, right? And then, the Chinese Communist Party, says, okay, well, we will sanction, certain activities, illicit, right, things that are not to us. From a value standpoint, acceptable, right? Stealing IP, all those kinds of things, and then exploiting them, right? So, do we know, what specifically was intentional? I don't think we'll ever know that, right? But if by providing an environment that allows for such exploitation to happen, right? I think that's kind of where we're at, right? And then they essentially found ways to beat us in very real ways at our own game on an unfair field, right, if you will, because of the not adhering to global norms, right, and again the stealing of intellectual property and the various coercive approaches to the economy that they've taken. So that I don't think there's a one way. Oh well, we were going to go after drones and and maybe there was, but I think and part of it has to do with us in industry. Maybe not realizing what was happening until it was too late, right?
I think one example of that we deal with at the Institute is shipbuilding. And I'm not the resident expert on shipbuilding, but that's an industry where we have let China take the lead. Americans aren't going into welding and a lot of these trade craft type of manufacturing jobs. And now we're really standing flat-footed on that. So that was a convergence where both sides were right. We didn't have the foresight to protect our fleets or the future of shipbuilding capacity, and China took advantage of that. And they're excelling in that role now, and it's a weakness. And so I think perhaps both could be true.
Yeah.
So one of the really interesting examples that you used of a sector that was particularly degraded by China that has national security significance in addition to shipbuilding is drones. So Peggy, could you explain a little bit more about sort of the Chinese playbook on drones? Was there a doctrinal or documented investment in these espionage activities, trade, IP theft? Did China see drones as potentially militarily useful several decades ago? Turning it over to you.
They certainly thought it was useful. Whether it was going to achieve the heights that it's achieved as a part of their military, I haven't found anything that speaks to that, again, in their intent and motivation. There has been academic espionage, infiltration of academic sectors that were doing this work as far back, and that's documented from the 90s. So all I can really go for is the evidence that surrounds it. I have not found myself a doctrine saying that drones are the way of the future. However, where it becomes tricky to me in terms of how aggressive they're being towards this, there was an infiltration, like I said, of academia and the hobbyist community. Drones were invented in America. I mean, as far as I know, proliferated in America, and there was an infiltration of that community. The technology brought back to China and subsidized and promoted heavily, to the point where the American companies were eventually have a much less market share. What scares me more about that is that, again, I mentioned this before, that China has this very crafty way of contributing components and things like this to actors that are more antithetical to the U.S. and then relaying plausible deniability. So, for instance, we have evidence also that China supported Iran and their drone strategy, supporting them with GPS, with antennas, with radio frequency. And Iran is now a big player in the drone industry as well. And these drones, it's also tricky because drones have civilian and military uses, but these drones we have evidence in the hands of Iranian proxies. The Houthis, we studied another Iranian proxy, the Mahdi army, where we have direct linkages from Iran to terrorist organizations. So officially, even China stopped major arms sales to Iran in the early 2000s, but they've been clearly complicit in exporting critical components to Iran, and that, yeah, again, and not asking questions about where it's going, but also, I mean, we know, so they know.
Yeah.
So, in terms of again, 20-year intent, unsure. At some point, how big this could be was acknowledged, and I think deliberately acted upon.
I'm gonna.
Yeah.
No, so Peggy hit on a couple things here too that I just want to reemphasize too, and it's like it's this trend, right, that you were talking about before, over and over again, of hey, we're going to take this information that we didn't legitimately garner, right? We're going to turn that in. You're going to reverse engineer, turn it into something, and then just scale at a massive level, right? So much so based on what their capacity for manufacturing, especially, and just basically undermine other markets completely, not just in the U.S. but otherwise too, and that's that trend that over and over again is what we've seen, right, with batteries, right, with drones and so forth, some of which have critical implications with regard to how national security is prosecuted, right? How some not so much. So.
Well, I'm curious to put you guys on the spot. What are some sectors critical to national security, or that you think that the Chinese playbook on drones could play out in? If you guys are able to share, some areas that you're particularly concerned about being a problem in the next decade, 2 decades.
Definitely in terrorism and conflict, we are emphasizing counterterrorism less as a nation in favor of global competition, but that is an easy way. They're easy to operate, they're easy to understand at a certain level, not all the technical bits of it, but fairly easy to attack U.S. installations. That's what comes to mind immediately for me.
Okay, awesome. Tim?
Yeah, so I think we have something to learn here from what's happened in Ukraine and what what operations look like over there. So, where are we going to, be able to have parity or advantage, right? Especially on the drone front, especially as fast as those technologies and capabilities are moving. That's to me, you worry about the vulnerabilities right there, the weaknesses. How operationally, how do you employ? Can you keep up from a speed standpoint to be relevant to the fight? All those things, I think, are what we have to worry about. And so, where is that capability coming from? Is it with allies and partners, right? Is it here at home that we're producing them? What's that mix look like? So we can be effective from a military standpoint.
Yeah, and one of the things on the state level with drones is what I hear is a big danger is the swarms idea. There's pros and cons. They are. My limited understanding of these, but that's the wave of what we should be looking out for in the future is what to do with these swarms of drones. They can be, I've heard they're easily dismantled, but also difficult to deal with, to operate. So there's pros and cons. It's not a direct threat yet, but that is something that our technology doesn't quite know how to handle yet. Thousands of drones coming at an aircraft or something like that is a coming threat.
Yeah. So I think we've established, that critical materials sectors that are important to national security have been degraded over the past couple decades. Due to IP theft, states, private criminal blending, regulatory pressure, what have you from China. And clearly, economics is important to national security. So Tim, I wanted to ask you, in your experience, why does elevating economics to an operational domain matter? What capabilities does that unlock? Just what significance is that?
So look, I guess harkens back to what we were just talking about a little bit. So, you put your military commander hat on, and you say, okay, this is my mission, right? This is what I'm supposed to do from a military standpoint. So, evaluating that through an economic lens and from a logistics lens really brings to light why this is so important. So, if I have a military mission that I evaluate is heavily reliant upon external supply chains, right, or supply chains that are vulnerable. Like, how do I mitigate that risk? How do I continue the fight? How do I continue my mission if I don't have access to that? Or does that put me dead in the water right away? So does that answer your question?
Absolutely.
So how do we evaluate, right, mitigate, understand? Because it's way before all these challenges, like these risks, these vulnerabilities. Not all of them, but they could definitely be identified holistically before you even get to the fight, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, what are we doing? Way left of bang, if you will. Accept that terminology. What are we doing to evaluate that? What are we doing to talk with industry about that? What are we doing with our allies and partners on that front? What are we doing, from a policy standpoint, so that when we do show up to the fight, we know that we have a logistics tail that we can rely on, that we can continue the fight, that those risks to military missions are credibly dealt with, right, from a prosecution standpoint.
Yeah, and we'll be doing a specific article on, the way that economics can fit into military planning. I think in a couple articles from now, so I'm really excited to be able to flesh that out even further, because I think there's so much to say there. But something I think we haven't talked a ton about is existing industrial policy and economic legislation that's come out in the past decade, in the past 5 years. So why has progress made in legislation, or for example by the House Select Committee, not been sufficient at meeting the moment? What does it need? More teeth? What's missing?
So I'll jump into this one. So I'll tell you what, the Select Committee, on the Chinese Communist Party, competition with the Chinese Communist, it's a long official title, but basically the China Committee on the House side. They've done a lot of really tremendous work. It has been very bipartisan, for the most part. But at the end of the day, they don't have jurisdiction, right, over anything in Congress, right? So the work that they do, they have to hand it over to a committee of jurisdiction, so the committee of jurisdiction can run with it and execute. And so so they've been able to do that. They've been able to do that in a lot of instances. Part of the problem is that because it's economics, it touches everything, right? So the committee is a jurisdiction, depending on what issue it is, touches a different. The committee that's worried about that policy, that actually can do something about it, they might not be attuned to what the Select Committee's focused on, or it's just one step further. So how do you deal with that from an institutional standpoint? When it comes to Congress, do you have some kind of gathering of the committee heads who have jurisdiction, and you can prioritize and focus on what the next best steps are from a policy standpoint, be it, shoot, I mean, there's just so many, I could think of instances where there's, Energy and Commerce has jurisdiction, where the Intel Committee has jurisdiction, or obviously Armed Services, where Finance, all of them. So how do you coordinate that from a congressional standpoint? It's very stovepiped. It's by design, right? So how do you overcome that? Again, they've done a lot of great work. You've seen the work that they've done they contributed to in several successes, national defense authorization bills. But this is also an emerging policy area with regard to contemporary economic statecraft, right? So what are we willing to accept? You know, how progressive are we as a country when it comes to embracing industrial policy? Mm-hmm. What does that look like from a contemporary standpoint? Because we haven't really exercised that a whole lot in previous decades. You know, we are doing things that we, you know, that we haven't necessarily done in the last few years, like buying stock, you know, in Intel and other, sectors that we've deemed critical to national security. So all that said, I think there are good things going on. I think there's some institutional challenges that hurdles that we have to grapple with. In the interim, I think there have been successes, and again, the work that the Select Committee has done from a investigation standpoint and shedding light on the challenges, and they're not the only ones too, right? There's other committees in Congress and work that's been done in the administration, this administration, the last administration, and the Trump one too, that has helped identify the challenges. But one of the challenges too is that it's not evident in the government who's the one referee, the coordinator for this kind of policy realm, mm-hmm. because it touches so many things. There's a lot of good disparate things going on with Commerce, at Treasury, DoD, DHS, but a lot of it is not necessarily coordinated, because they're worried mm-hmm. about their authorities, right, their jurisdiction, what's going on. But so how do you elevate that and coordinate it and analyze together so you can get, again, left of bang, you can get that good analytical approach. It's never going to be perfect, just because of our open government, the way we're, the way we're, just the whole way that we work, right? But so there's some challenges there, but I think we're coming around. And again, that's one of the reasons why we're doing this series of articles, right? Is kind of exposing the facets that in the complexities of this challenge area that we have. Mm-hmm. So
yeah, I'd just like to echo that. That last theme is one that's near and dear to our hearts at Potomac Institute. It's not a blame game. There's excellent work being done by public servants at all these agencies. It's just the theme we hear over and over again is that it is siloed, and the left hand doesn't know what the right is doing all the time. And so the need for some sort of coordinating body, coordinating agency, or at least a centrality of thought, something to bring this great work that is being done, working together. And we hear that from leaders inside of these agencies. It's not meant to be critical. It's meant to be more innovative, forward-thinking, creative. Yeah. And so it's not a condemnation on anyone's part.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think that was a very common theme that we picked up on when I was at this summit, was that there just needs to be more coordination, because so many wonderful people are writing just incredible things about economic statecraft, and people are experts in so many different things, and it's such a diffuse field, and I think people are still trying to come to terms with what the field is, that there just needs to be a coordinating agency. I'm curious though, why you guys think that the Defense Department might be the best fit for that. And I know we'll have other articles that will touch on this, but why might DoD be the best fit, or why has it emerged as perhaps the best coordinating actor so far?
So this is one of the findings at our summit, right? Mm-hmm. This is one of the takeaways, right? And I think you look at DoD, they obviously are the big gorilla in the room when it comes to the federal government. I mean, they get a lot of resources. Touch on a lot of things. So I think that's, and because it's, it's very forward that this issue, right, it has to do directly with national security. So, and we're, DoD they're really good at planning, right? They're really good at operationalizing strategies.
Yeah.
That's their bread and butter in a lot of ways, right? So I think not that it's an easy button, but they have the resources, they have the people, they have the culture in a lot of ways on a scale that is not matched. And this is not a surprising thing. It's not a new thing, right? Like DoD ends up deals with a lot of, I think, challenges because of those reasons. So is it the best? Well, is it the best suited? That's the question du jour. I mean, I think again, they have a mission and focus, right? So does Commerce, so does Treasury, so does DHS. So I think how does that how can that ecosystem look? And in the meantime, how can DoD wield the resources and efforts that they do have, and the initiatives that they've taken to help the team, right, get to where we need to go. And you see instances like the OSC,
Strategic capital.
yes,
Yeah.
thank you. Office of Strategic Capital doing the things that they're doing to make sure that we're invested, that the nation's investing in the right things, right, and, when it comes to military capability. So examples like that. What's the derivative of that for different missions across the government? I think.
Yeah, I completely agree. It will probably require some maneuvering on defense's part. When we look at so much of the problem being sanctions evasion and financial, and Treasury is just at the core of that. Or even this summer, Department of State was releasing grants for educating foreign business leaders on how not to accidentally trip into various supply chains. And so there is tons of programming across these agencies. And so while I agree defense is probably the best location for it, we're talking about some extensive training or opening of thought that needs to accompany that.
Okay.
So let me caveat this. So I don't necessarily know that DoD is the best, but it has emerged as a very big contributor to addressing this because of the resources. I mean, time will tell. What makes most sense on who's the lead and what organizations lead, and if a new one's created or if one that exists will be that. But right now, I mean, I think that was again a takeaway, an observation from that last summit.
And for instance, state budget has been fluctuating, so that's why we would say naturally that it might be a safer place at defense.
Uh-huh. So in line with that, Tim, what's one step then that active duty enlisted or officers could take today to begin to prepare for the realities of a more protracted or more intense economic war with China in the future?
So I don't think that there's a better question for me to do a shameless plug for this series of articles that we're putting out. Educate yourself, right? It's learn about it and understand what's going on, because like it or not, if you understand economics or not, it's going to impact the way you prosecute your mission, the way you operationalize your mission. So educating, understanding what the threats are, evaluating what the threats are to your mission by understanding the different facets of it, and then mitigating it, right? What can I do at the very tactical level? It might be from a logistics standpoint, where do I buy X, Y, or Z thing to make sure that we or what does my supply chain look like for doing this? So it's from the strategic very down to the tactical level. Educate, right? Evaluate. How these various facets are going to impact your mission, and then mitigate them. We DoD is amazing at this, right? Understanding risk, and then figuring out ways to deal with it, and acceptance of risk, right, at various levels. That's what this is. It's another thing to take into account. However, it's not something necessarily commanders or down to your lowest enlisted troop are well versed in, right? And that's, you know, by virtue of how training takes place and right and education takes place. You know, it's not often that you have somebody that spends, you know, 10, 15, 20 years on Wall Street, turns around and enlists in the Army. I mean, it happens, right? Yeah. But who are those people that have a foot in both worlds, right? That can help move the community forward and the ecosystem forward, right? On such things. So we do understand risk better. So I'd argue that, you know, our reserve component members, there's you know, tons of them in the economic sector, and then they understand how the military operates. They speak the jargon, right? They're worried about how you know, how they're going to prosecute those military missions. So how can we learn? How can we leverage that subset? You know, in getting to the right place. How do we educate ourselves better in that regard?
Awesome. So I want to end with a call to action. Your article ends with a call to action from government, industry, and the military. So I did want to ask, what group, just rapid fire question, do you worry is the least prepared to confront the threat in the next 5 years, say? Would it be government, military, or industry?
You want to take that first? Or you want me to tackle it?
I have, my answer is non-committal. Yeah. It's just whoever is unwilling to take risks, embrace challenges, locate our vulnerabilities. One thing that we are sometimes not great at is admitting where we are vulnerable internally, because no one wants to admit that, because that affects budgets, that affects command structures, things like that. And so we have to get very honest with ourselves about where our vulnerabilities lie. And also agencies have to not be very territorial in the government. I'm most familiar with the government. Usually I'd say industry can move a little faster. I think that's a common consensus. But without pointing out to one group, I'll just say whomever is unwilling to change and whoever's going to stick to being territorial, boundary driven, and politics as usual.
So, you know, I'll build on that. I'm going to take a stand, though, and say that, I think the government, the last several years, right, is really becoming attuned to that. And again, we've talked about some of these things, right? There's new policies, industrial policy. You're seeing legislation. You're seeing tools. You're seeing the China Committee doing their investigations, all that kind of stuff. There's all kinds of great work going on, and some of it might be siloed. But so I think the government's moving in the right direction, frankly, really. And as a derivative of that, the military, like what we were talking about, right, DoD and Shepard Wise, because they're very much affected, right, by if I have vulnerabilities in my supply chain, being able to prosecute. Where I worry, frankly, but again, I'm optimistic about is industry, right? Some are very attuned to what's going on here, and we've discussed it, and obviously those in the national security realm very much attuned to it, especially with new policies coming out that that make sure that there's security in the supply chains. But what I worry about is those in industry that that they'll have the rug pulled out from under them, because they're in a technology area maybe that or their corporate culture just is not focused on these kinds of things, right? And all of a sudden they'll find themselves upside down, where they may have had a very leading edge technology, right, that's going to help. It could even help from a national security standpoint, right? And all of a sudden it's not there because they didn't take the time, or they just weren't aware of it with regard to the threats associated with it, the risks, especially on the international front, that they have to grapple with. So what the good thing is, though, again, in our work here, we've seen CEOs, we've seen board members, we've seen executives, and some of this is a derivative from work that we've done with Ben's business executives for national security, right? We've seen more interest and focus on this in education. So, and here's the other thing, and I know this was supposed to be rapid fire, but so sorry about that. But yeah, so I lost my thought there. But essentially, industry is I think where we got to make sure that we're continuing to encourage and educate so they can pay attention to this.
Awesome. Well, that was great, guys. I do want to get to our one Q&A question. So Anne asked, thoughts about how to deal with Chinese national students at universities, at U.S. universities. What should be the government's policy stance in terms of filtering espionage embedded from legitimate academic exchange? It's a hard question.
Very hard. And I actually remember Anne. We had met a long time ago at a forum, and we had a wonderful conversation. She poses excellent questions. So again, with the zinger, this is something we grapple with. We grapple with almost at every meeting we have. Our board of regents are significantly invested in this issue. It's very difficult. There are extreme risks. But also there's extreme talent, and we want to be a bastion of that talent and innovation and growth. Yeah, it's not an easy one at all. I don't know, Tim, if you have any deeper insight.
No, I think, so one of the things that we've been talking about recently, which is, so back up to, so the Global Competition Project, right, which we started 5 years ago-ish. One of the consistent themes, and I know it was an issue way before we started the Global Competition Project, but part of the focus of that project is, okay, what are the most critical things moving forward in the 21st century, right, that are going to make sure that we have an advantageous global posture as a country, right? What are the vulnerabilities and all that kind of stuff? Hands down, right, is this, you have to have, from a Potomac Institute focus, right, science and technology, hands down, you have to have a talent pipeline, right? You have to first focused on STEM. That means it's critical to our, our economic model, right? Being successful, to innovation, to what you were talking about. So, specifically with regard to the policies that have to do with Chinese national students, I'm going to leave that to the policymakers that are experts on that front. I will tell you, we were talking about the committee, the select committee on China. They did some pretty deep investigations, right, on academia and what that looks like, from all the information that's been transferred and all that kind of stuff. So I think there's a lot there. Do I have the solution? No, but is talent important to our university system and us being able to do good research and development and to turn that into economic growth and being able to be secure as a country? Absolutely important. So I know that doesn't answer your question directly, and sorry, but there's a lot of facets to it. And again, that's why we're doing the series, right?
Yeah.
Let's talk about it.
So
And that'll be one of the
yeah,
that'll be one of the
that
articles
is-
actually is focused on talent, right, and what that looks
building
like.
the pipeline.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right, Peggy and Tim, are there any closing thoughts? What's your pitch to government, industry, military, to our audience that's watching this?
Sure, I can start. I'd just like to repeat that, we're not saying it's anyone's fault where we've gotten. We're trying to be forward-thinking, forward-looking, embrace the connectedness that we see. And it's a call to action for government to... what's nice about this message is that we don't get a whole lot of disagreement. Within government and industry, people are ready to hear this message.
Mm-hmm.
Just don't know exactly how to operationalize it yet. And so the call to action is that we not take this incrementally, but we really take this challenge head on.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Tim?
Yeah, so I'll go back to what I started with, right? So education, right? I think that's vastly important. Self-education, but educating each other, right? And I'm talking about government educating industry, industry educating government, right? Them talking between each other, and academia too. This is a societal level challenge, right? And we need to approach it with what we do best, which is forward-looking, right? Innovation, agility. That's how we have succeeded as a country. I think there's great opportunity to succeed here too. And we just, do it in our own way, right? It takes some time. By recognizing the problem and driving towards some actions which we've identified. Again, you look at our summit report, and there's some very pointed directions to go. But really, one of the most important things, and I know we're running out of time here, is hey, industry's in the driver's seat. They really are, because they drive the economics. So we got to make sure that is at the forefront too as we think through it.
Yeah, I could not agree more. So thank you guys so much for joining us today. It was a blast. We've heard so much about these issues and problem sets, and I'm really excited to be exploring these in separate subsequent articles that will be coming out on War in the Rocks. So to our audience, please do make sure to read War by Other Ledgers. We'll be releasing those articles hopefully every Thursday. We should have one out tomorrow. We will be leaving a link for our next webinar with Dr. Will Norris exploring his next article, Economic Statecraft and the Federal Institutional Architecture, on February 25th, so do make sure to register. The webinar will be at the same time and channel, so hopefully you can make it. Thank you to the Potomac Institute and for both of you guys for joining me. It's been a lot of fun, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, Maddie.
Thanks, Maddie. This is great.